VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. You know, we always do countdowns at the beginning of the show. We are less than 5 weeks from minicamp, mandatory minicamp. We'll get a look at all of these shiny new rookies and UDFAs in the purple and gold and the horns on their helmet. Yesterday on a solo trip, it felt kind of lonely. I went through storylines that I expect all of us to talk about, headlined by, of course, you're going to get sick of this, Darnold or McCarthy. And we won't know anything tangible about that situation until July and probably August. But today, we are back with our mainstay guest, the boss at Purple PTSD, Josh Frey. How goes it?
It's going well, man. I got to watch the Bucks pull off a nice little upset last night. We spent about 10 minutes pre-show talking about NBA playoffs, which is always a good time. One of these days, we're just going to have to do an NBA show, it seems
Yep,
like.
I'm down.
All right, yeah. But, yeah, drafting the Bucks, time to look ahead to 2024 season. And, yeah, it's a
Do
great
you
time.
have any sort of hangover because you love the draft so much?
I definitely, over the past couple of days, have felt myself in a little bit of a lull. Like, oh man, that was a long weekend. That was a lot of stuff, and now I'm starting to come out of it. Now I'm looking ahead. Just the roster could look like this in September, or it could look like this, something like that. But yeah, definitely had a couple days there. I was like, oh man, I need to take a step back.
Yeah, it shows up. Thankfully, the NBA playoffs do a wonderful job of hedging the bet of boredom because at least for the next week, it'll slow down a little bit. There's always multiple basketball games on, and they're
Yeah,
pressure cooked basketball games. Or you could just go work at Score North and do mock schedules.
there you go. Yeah.
Try those out for. I couldn't believe that when I saw. I was like, "What are we doing?" They claimed that they would have content to talk about when Kirk Cousins left, but I don't know that they do. So. All right,
We'll
no
see.
mock schedules here today. What we're going to do is go through surprising takeaways from the draft because I'll say it was quiet because we were so enthused, absolutely excited that the Vikings got the best of both worlds with J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner. It felt like, you know what, they could do no wrong the rest of the way. And so what I want to know from you, perhaps you rank these. Let's start at the bottom of the list and work our way up to the top surprising takeaway. What do you got for something that maybe didn't baffle you, but made you go, huh, we're doing that, huh?
I think at number 5 for me, I would say that they didn't draft a wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because it was the ultimate need on the roster, which I mean, they definitely need somebody at wide receiver 3, especially if Hawkinson is going to miss a portion of the season. But I think with Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, they could at least get by with those two guys being the top 2 receivers. I feel pretty good about that, but ultimately it surprises me just because of the sheer amount of talent that this wide receiver class had. And honestly, maybe that's just the way of the NFL now, where you're going to look at round 5, 6, 7 for years to come and be like, oh, we can get this guy, we can get this guy, we can get this guy, and he can at least contribute to our roster. So maybe it just wasn't at the top of their draft board by the end of the day. But I'm still just a little surprised just because of how many players were in this draft class that were really dang good. We talked about them for months on end, just how good this wide receiver class was. But the fact that Kwesi just kind of stood pat and was like, yep, we're kind of good with what we got right now. We're not going to take a stab at a receiver. Maybe the Tyler Boyd thing ends up panning out or something like that. They get another free agent, but I was a little surprised that they didn't take a shot at a wide receiver in this draft.
So was I, because the depth in rounds 4 through 6, there was the perception of maybe a dozen guys that could be WR3. And the reason, it's not a really high bar to clear to be a WR3. You have to be
Right.
good and get 600 yards and about 8 touchdowns. So it's like, it's not a really badass thing to say, oh, this draft has got so many WR3s, because WR3s are basically mid with the hope that, hey, they're going to blossom into a WR2, kind of like we thought for KJ Osborne for so long. And it seemed like every time the Vikings were up to pick, there was always at least one wide receiver, usually about 5. They'd be like, oh, it'd be sweet if they got Jamari Thrasher, Javon Baker's still there. And they were like, nope, no thanks. But I think in support of your argument here, on any given Wednesday, maybe Saturday, chilling at the crib in Egan, they can just go get about 6 different WR3s from the NFL's marketplace. Now, they might be old, Michael Thomas or Odell Beckham. Tyler Boyd isn't crazy old, and he's ultra productive. DJ Chark, Hunter Renfrow. So there must be some sort of confidence that they have that if we get to summer and we don't like what Powell's doing, or Jalen Nailors has a concussion, that they have that insurance. And a lot of spots, like we know in Living Color, aren't like that right now. They're down to
Right.
total nubbins. So on the whole, because you're going to have you already have your rookie quarterback, And like you said, Hawkinson is almost guaranteed to be on the PUP list, or like I just think it's way too good to be true that he would be ready week 1. WR3 is going to be really important, especially if it's McCarthy out of the gate. So yes, I was right there with you. And I'm surprised actually you didn't have this one higher because it was an opportunity in those mid rounds to not invest a lot and to take a swing on Jamari Thrash or something like that. But they said no thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of seen it already with Brandon Powell. Like he's definitely capable, at least in flashes, of carrying that wide receiver 3. And honestly, for that Atlanta game, he was kind of wide receiver 2 for a while as well. But I mean, he definitely seems capable of holding that for at least a little while. So maybe that's the plan. If Hawkinson has to miss like 4 or 5 weeks or something, yeah, we can throw Brandon Powell out and at least feel comfortable with it. But yeah, like you said, there was a lot of talent. There's still a lot of talent on the free agency market. So I wouldn't be super surprised if they ended up bringing somebody else in as well.
I'll always take solace in knowing where we're at in Vikings football is we're kind of ho-hum on Powell maybe being the WR3, whereas in 2019, 2020, we would be like, sweet, we got our WR3, Brandon Powell. That's where we're at with an offensive-minded regime. So I always kind of like, all right, well, at least we feel this way, whereas before we're like, Chad Beebe, badass, baby, let's give it a shot. That used to be the bar. All right, what's number 4?
Number 4, I think just the JJ McCarthy slide all the way down to number 10. Like if you told me that was going to happen before the draft, I wouldn't have been ultra surprised. Like, okay, maybe somebody just didn't trade up to go get him, which obviously ended up happening. But be like, what happened here? What did these other teams take? Where did everybody else go? Who traded up? Who ended up getting quarterbacks at what spots? But ultimately, just the fact that the Vikings were able to move up one spot and go get their quarterback of the future without having to give up a ton of draft capital, it was surprising to me. But at the end of the day, just honestly, that Michael Penix thing is what really was the headline of that ultimate surprise of the quarterback class.
That will be, in my lifetime, that'll be a top 3 or top 5 draft surprise. I remember because I try to stay off Twitter when the draft picks are going because I don't want it to be spoiled, especially the Vikings. And I was on there looking for something stupidly, and I started seeing the OMGs, and I was like, what did they do? Like, it did not even entertaining. Like, I thought it was like a Vikings thing where they like forgot to make the pick or they were late or something. I was like, what could they have done? And then my immediate reaction was Penix. Well, sweet. I don't have to worry about him anymore. And then it's been this week after that I've been like, holy shit, the Falcons could have spoiled all of this for the Vikings like that. If anybody knew quarterback was on their radar, the Vikings would have had to trade up to number, I guess, 5, 6, or 7, which is kind of what we were thinking for McCarthy in general. So let that be a draft lesson that you can never cross a team off the board and say, well, hey, they just got Cousins. Like, that's the ultimate example. We just spent $180 on Cousins, $180 million on Cousins. They don't need a quarterback. Well, yes, they did. I think why McCarthy slid is because of the Giants, which was a very apparent smokescreen. Because if it wasn't a smokescreen, they would have drafted McCarthy right there at number 6. So a lesson learned there. That team with the quarterback that needed a wide receiver actually did what they were supposed to. Let me ask you this before we get to your number 3. Why the hell didn't the Falcons just take McCarthy? If they wanted to do what they're calling the Packers model, that's from the lips of the general manager, Terry Fontenot, wouldn't you take the guy who's the youngest quarterback in the draft rather than the oldest quarterback?
Man, Brev, and Tyler went over this in our post-draft episode on Friday, and I really don't understand the idea behind it. Like, I kind of, to an extent, understand drafting a quarterback, but with Kirk Cousins just signing that contract, you want to make the Aaron Rodgers comp. Aaron Rodgers was the solidified starter for a decade plus when they selected Jordan Love, and he was on like one more year of his contract when they made that decision. So I don't think those are apples to apples comparisons. And then I get Kirk Cousins is injury prone. Maybe he's not completely healthy from his Achilles tendon at this point. But to go get another guy who's injury prone is going to be a 25-year-old rookie instead of the 21-year-old who just won the national championship, beating Michael Penix on the biggest stage. Like, I understand the idea. I just don't understand the process whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Penix's injury history. This is the first time I've thought about that since last Thursday. I just stopped caring about his injury history
Yeah.
because he's not going to be a Viking. And so that became a footnote for me, even considering it, because I was so shocked by them taking him in general. So I've tried to figure out, like, the sad part is that out of all QB1s that have lived, or all the QB1s in the world right now, having Cousins be the guy affected by this is probably the worst, because he's like, there were times that he got on my nerves when he'd say, like, well, hey, you never know when you're gonna get benched for throwing interception. I'd be like, stop saying that shit. You're the QB
You're
one, and
Kirk Cousins.
you're getting paid $35 million. And he's like, you never know when Mike Zimmer might bench me. It's like, what are you doing? You're not going to get benched. Fling the ball. And so now, not even told about it until like 30 seconds before the pick, the one guy that might have feathers ruffled tremendously by a pretty coveted quarterback nipping at his heels would be Cousins. And so in that vein, I feel a little bit bad for him, but then at the end of the day, he chose to leave the Vikings. And so I try to reconcile that. But do you agree that for a quarterback that covets security and planning, all of a sudden they drop this into his lap?
That's another thing of this. Like, for years, Kirk Cousins had Sean Mannion as his backup because the Vikings were, it seemed like the Vikings were just scared of giving him a ton of competition for, like, hey, we're planning for the future. We're not going to have you forever. We got to get another guy in here. And they just never really did something like that. And just Michael Penix just coming in and, hey, he's your backup. He might actually be the starter at some point in the next couple of years, because we just don't know how good you're going to end up being going into your late 30s. Just I don't know how he's going to respond to it, but this is definitely unprecedented for his career.
I'm trying to think before we move on to your number 3. I guess it's kind of an important topic because it involves Cousins. What would you have thought the night of and now the Wednesday after on the podcast from a Falcons or trying to digest the Falcons decision making if it was McCarthy?
I would feel better about it, just because, like I said, he's 21, not 24. It makes a lot more sense for him to be your developmental guy and then throw him into the starting lineup in a couple of years down the road. But yeah, I like I said, I kind of understand the idea, but their process of how they went about it, not letting Cousins know, like McCartney being like, hey, the entire league had no idea this was going to happen right after it ended up happening. It's just baffling. And yeah, I've spent the entire week trying to rationalize this from a Falcons perspective, and I'm just not really able to come up with any answers at this point, other than maybe Kirk Cousins is getting suspended because of tampering. That's the only thing I can really come up with.
Yeah, I guess if they wanted to send that message, that would be the almighty one. I just don't see that one coming. I think they'll probably strip one of their third rounders or something, and that'll be that.
Yeah.
All right. So, we still haven't figured out why the Falcons. Maybe in 3 years they'll be genius because Cousins got hurt again or something. But for now, they need defensive help. It's not like they're chilling like with the Chiefs type of roster where it's like, well, it didn't matter who they draft. It's gravy. No, they needed some help on defense. That's why Dallas Turner was mocked to them like every other mock draft. All right, what's number 3 on your list of surprising Vikings takeaways from the draft?
Number 3 is the fact that Kwesi ended up making not one trade up the board in the first round, but 2 to go get Dallas Turner. This is like just completely unprecedented from his tenure as a GM. Like, the only other trade he had ever made in the first round was to move down from number 12 to number 32 to get Lewis Seen and pick up a bunch of other draft picks. That just has always been his MO as a general manager. I'm going to move down, stock up these draft picks to utilize either later on in the draft on some quality players or into the future. And he didn't do that. In fact, he kind of mortgaged the Vikings' future a little bit in terms of draft picks, and he ended up going and getting Dallas Turner. Like you said, he was the guy that a lot of people had mocked to the Falcons. I sure did. And I thought he was, if not the best edge rusher in this class, probably the second best behind Laiatu Latu, just because he's a little less technical in his development at this point. But Just the fact that the Vikings were able to get not just their quarterback of the future, but a premier edge defender to pair him with, and really get two cornerstones for their offense and then for their defense. That one was very surprising to me, and I think it's kind of marking the end of the rebuild portion of this competitive
Mhm.
rebuild, and they're starting to get more into, hey, we're trying to win right now.
If you'll recall, at the first press conference of the offseason, Kwesi Mensah said that we're going to shed the rebuild term from competitive rebuild. We have to thread the needle. We have to have a successful offseason. And I think the latter move of the first round, getting Turner, was proof in living color that at least this is their way of trying to do it. Now, make no mistake, I'm going to keep saying this. Dallas Turner was an expensive son of a bitch. This
Yeah.
trade cost 2 seconds, 2 seconds, a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Is that correct?
I believe it might not have cost a fifth, but definitely the 2
Okay.
seconds, third, and fourth. I don't remember if there was a fifth thrown in there. Actually, maybe? I don't
I
remember.
think
I
there
don't remember.
was. So it's
Maybe.
5 football players that it
Yeah.
cost, and the way that Vikings fans can get away with it, or the Vikings get away with it, and fans can rationalize it is, well, we thought we were going to have to trade the farm to get McCarthy or Drake May, and therefore, like, this draft haul like maintains or retains the first rounders, while saying, the Rams model, we don't care about the mid-round picks. And so that's how I tell myself, like, when I look at the haul, I'm like, geez, this was a lot for a defensive player. But if he's going to replace Danielle Hunter in time, they basically just said, you know what, we're letting Kirk Cousins walk, our quarterback, and our edge rusher, Danielle Hunter, walk. We're getting a new quarterback. We're getting a new edge rusher in round 1. So they were seamlessly replaced. Before we launch into number 2, I want to ask you this, because when McCarthy fell and it became real that, hey, we're going to get him at 11, or it turns out you had to go up one spot. I've said this a couple times. I spent so little time thinking about what the Vikings could do at pick number 23, because I thought that was all but gone. For sure,
Yeah.
that's going to be traded up the board. When we didn't know about the trade with Jacksonville to get Turner, what did you have in mind in that half hour or so for the next player? Because to me, it was Quinion Mitchell, Byron Murphy, and Dallas Turner. Did you have other thoughts in mind?
I was thinking Johnny Newton
Okay.
for a lot of it, just because you need that sort of pass rush presence at the defensive tackle spot. So that would have been probably my number one. And then Quinion Mitchell was there as well, just
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
there
I kept
hadn't
thinking of
been,
you.
because there wasn't a single cornerback off the board. And I've been hyping up Mitchell this entire offseason. It would have been really cool to see him in purple. Now I have to root against him in Philadelphia. So that's going to hurt a little bit. But yeah, those would have been my first two. And just the fact that they were able to maintain that 23rd overall pick, just picking anybody at that spot would have been like, okay, this is gravy. We never thought this was going to end up working out this way. So the fact that we got another first rounder, but to go get arguably the top edge rusher off the board with the 17th overall pick, like it made what was already a really good draft for the Vikings even better. And like you said at the beginning, I think anything that happened in day 3 didn't really matter at that point. You got your quarterback, you got your edge rusher. We're all good now.
And a spoiler, this is going to, unless there's a lot of trades this summer or in the season in general, this is going to be the same shit next year,
Yeah.
where they're going to hopefully have a draft pick that's in the 20s, but realistically probably in the top 12. And then there's the huge drought until round 5, and then that's it. There isn't shit after. They've already spent their 6th and 7th rounders next year on,
Yeah,
was it pick
they
swap
should
for
get a
Darius
comp
Smith?
pick for the
Yeah,
Cousins
that's right.
departure.
That's right.
So they'll have another third rounder in there, but yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, it's still gonna be a drought, at least like 80 picks or something.
Yeah. So I can see Kwesi doing stuff this summer to, like, put more draft picks in the piggy bank, but I don't know that there's any players that they'd be willing to trade that would get them into round 3. Or I don't think anybody's going to spend a 4th on Lewis Seen and those type of guys. So outside of trading Brian O'Neill or somebody, like, there's really no way to get more picks at this point. So get ready for this talking point. You and I will be talking about it every day of the next draft class. Kwesi will trade down from that first pick, whatever it is, and hopefully just make it like a snowball. And that
Yeah.
way, I think that is what his process and plan is, because I'm fairly certain he's like, yeah. I don't think he's like, yeah, who cares? I think he already knows that, all right, next year we're probably going to have the 8th or 9th pick. We'll trade that down to 14, then we'll trade it down to 21, and then boom, you're cooking with gas. You're back to having a second rounder, probably another third rounder. I would be stunned if they sticked and picked next year wherever they're at after what they had to pull off for the Dallas Turner trade.
I would absolutely agree with that, and I think especially if they end up with something around 8-9. Looking at this roster right now, it doesn't really feel like you need a premier guy anymore, especially if Justin Jefferson does sign that contract, then if that doesn't happen, then that changes things a little bit. But if he does sign that contract, it doesn't really look like they have all that many massive needs on their roster, especially at premier positions. So you can definitely afford to trade down if you end up in one of those spots.
Yeah. What I keep thinking about with the roster is it true that Brian Flores really just doesn't need a defensive tackle that rushes the passer, because they had so many chances to get somebody, maybe not spend $110 million on Christian Wilkins, and then the run in round 2 on every single defensive tackle in the world. The Vikings couldn't participate because they didn't have a second rounder. To me, it just looks like just kind of like Zimmer, like they just don't really care about that spot. Like it's negligible when you see other teams who swear by it. I can't figure that one out. All right, what are we, to number 2 or to number 1?
We're at number 2, and for this one, I think it's just the fact that Kwesi didn't make any trades in day 3. I really thought that if it was 108, 177, one of these picks, they were going to trade down and try to get more capital for 2025, but they just ended up sticking and picking, which, I mean, they got some quality guys. I mean, Kyrie Jackson can be something, hopefully. He's definitely much more of a press man type of cornerback, so that's promising if Brian Flores wants to utilize that part of his defense a little bit more. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, but I really thought that with only 3 picks going into 2025, they were going to do something to try to recoup some of those losses that they spent in day 1, and they just didn't do it.
Yeah, they must love Kyrie Jackson to stay at that spot, because they had a golden opportunity to either flip that for a third next year. A lot of times teams do that, or to trade a little bit further down and get like a 5th or 6th next year. And yeah, I would, if I was a gambling person, I would have wagered a lot of money that there would have been a single trade by the Vikings on Saturday, mainly because they had 5 picks going into it. And then that's just what it was. It was the 5 picks. It was kind of how other teams do it, where, you know, we don't have that bonanza, and we're so accustomed to the bonanza, whether it was Spielman or Kwesi, who trades even more than Rick ever dreamed of. So yeah, it just kind of went radio silent, but I keep coming back that this is the price of getting your franchise quarterback and then getting hopefully your defensive cornerstone. Is you had to trade a bunch, and therefore you couldn't be as active on Friday and Saturday. I kept having friends, high school friends and stuff, messaging me like, God, I wish we had some picks today. This was on Friday.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, so do I, but they're not coming.
Not going to happen. Sorry. Maybe next year.
Yeah. I had people message me, hey, how can we get back into round 2? And I'm like, well, you'll have to trade next year's first. You'll have to trade Brian O'Neill. Like, you're not going to be able to do it. Like, there just isn't a way. All right. What was the most surprising part of the Vikings, the takeaway from the draft?
Well, I mean, we've kind of hinted at it already, but just waiting until round 7 to finally go get a defensive tackle. Like you said already, it seems like they're just fine with, hey, we'll roll out a couple guys here, and maybe we can develop some of these depth guys, whether it's Jaquelin Roy or Levi Drake Rodriguez, who they ended up drafting. Maybe they can develop into something of a rotational player, but it really feels like they're just, yeah, we've got our edge guys. That's all we really need. We're just going to rely on these guys to be beefy run defense presence. We don't need them to rush the pass or get after. But I mean, Harrison Phillips, to his credit, definitely did at least a little bit of that last year, but Jonathan Bullard's not very good in that area. And I don't think you can rely on him for that. But maybe with Grenard, Van Ginkel, and Dallas Turner and Gabriel Murphy, maybe you can turn those guys into your just true pass rush guys and just let the defensive tackles focus on stopping the run. But ultimately, that was the surprising thing for me, just because outside of the quarterback position, I would have viewed that as the number 1 need for this Vikings roster right now. And
there's also this aspect, like, do you consider Harrison Phillips a true nose tackle?
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah. So they don't have any.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Like Tiaki, or they might have an undrafted free agent. I haven't even looked to see how much he weighs to determine if he's a nose tackle. But what's his name? God, who was the Tonga? He's gone.
Oh yeah, right.
Yep. And I mean, not that he was an utter badass, but
He's something.
They don't have any nose tackles,
Yeah.
right?
It not really. No, they're kind of making Harrison Phillips their faux nose tackle, but I mean, yeah, they don't really have a true like I'm this 3'6'3", 350-pound monster that they can just
And
throw in there.
usually each team has at least one of those guys.
Yeah.
Like now, it's really easy to go get Sheldon Day, like this afternoon if they want to. But it's weird to me. I was getting the depth chart all updated, and I was like, "They don't have any nose tackles here, people." And usually you can say like, "Hey, we got Kairos Tonga, we're gonna be okay." But yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I had in an article like free agents they could look at would be Linval Joseph, just as like a guy to take some of the heat off, because you might remember in March, Kevin Seifert tweeted about Kevin O'Connell that said that they want to diminish the snap loads of the Harrisons. Like they don't want Harrison Phillips to have that massive a workload, and of course Harrison Smith. Well, that's great, but then who's going to play?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There aren't any beef eaters in the middle of the line, especially with Tonga gone.
Yeah, it's Brian Flores is just running his defense as a bunch of lean, mean dudes that can do a little bit of everything, but they're not especially awesome at any of them. But I mean, that to his credit, he definitely made it work in 2023, like with Metellus emerging and Ivan Pace coming out of absolutely nowhere. Maybe it's got Gabriel Murphy, who's this next year's version of Ivan Pace, who can just come into the defense and wow everybody. But yeah, defensive tackle at least for now, it doesn't seem like they have one of those guys, where they're going to come in and just absolutely shock everybody in camp and be, oh, he's starting week one all of a sudden. Like, it doesn't seem like that's the case, but I'm just going to trust Brian Flores that he's got a plan. It worked out last year. Hopefully it works out again this year.
Yeah, in the like, let's say they realize or they decide like, hey, we need somebody who weighs 330 pounds. There's usually a lot of veteran nose tackles that are hanging out on like for years. I think he's retired now. Snacks Harrison would just be there. You could be like, oh, cool, we can get him if things get dire. But the thing that's odd to me is that nobody really cares about having that big guy, and it must be just a thing in Brian Flores' defense because it's kind of a important thing to forget. All right, I got two more questions for you, and then I will let you go for the day. How, in your estimation, 3 years in a row, do the Vikings always get the top UDFA? What is the hack?
I don't even know that I have an answer for this other than Kwesi's just really damn good at his job, man. He scours these guys for hours on end, and they obviously I'm assuming you're talking about Murphy here with this question specifically.
Yeah, well, it was first Luigi Villain. He was
right.
like, he may not have blossomed like Ivan Pace, but that was 2022. And then last year it was very certainly Ivan Pace, and then now this year it's Gabriel Murphy. So we're getting to the point where it's like, oh, wait till after the draft, because that's when Kwesi really starts working. How do you think he has a pre-existing, like, we're going to call you and we're going to give you this X dollars and you're going to sign this? Like, how does it keep happening? Because the Vikings we love the Vikings, but they're not like America's team. Like, they're not like the New York Knicks. Like, why do we keep getting all of these sweet players?
Yeah, I can't say that I have a great answer for it other than Kwesi knows what he's doing. And they definitely had Gabriel Murphy and Ivan Pace in for pre-draft visits over the past couple of years. I can't remember if they had Villain in for one as well, but I think that definitely helps too, where they're not just using their top 30 visits on the absolute top guys in the draft. They're going up and down the board to find these guys and learn more about them. So I think that helps out a little bit. But yeah, that's the only thing I can really think of other than, hey, we're going to give you this contract. It's going to be bigger than anybody else is going to offer you. And you're going to come here. So yeah, Kwesi just knows what he's doing in UDFA.
That might be it. Now we're doing the detective work on the fly here, because I remember about a week for the draft, I wrote about Ty James from Mercer meeting with the Vikings. And I was like, top 30 visits spent on this guy.
Yeah.
It might be that they invest one of their visits in a guy that they know probably isn't going to draft it. That was a bold strategy for Murphy because he should have gone off the board, kind of like Pace somewhere. So maybe that is it, like solidifying the relationship for guys who didn't get much top 30 attention, and then, basically woo them and then say, hey, if we can't get you in the draft, we're going to call you at 5:30 p.m. Saturday night. Like, you pick up that phone. And that must be it, because it keeps working. Like, it's no longer one-offs.
And I mean, at the end of the day, they also like it comes out with report cards every single year. They have one of the top facilities in the entire
Yeah.
NFL. So you get those guys in the building, and they're impressed. Like, oh, this is a lot better than so and so,
Yeah.
And so I think that might play a role in it as well.
The last thing, were the Vikings smart to shoo away the analytics crowd about drafting a kicker?
I'm fine with it. I don't
Yeah.
really have any qualms with it. I'm a little surprised that they ended up taking the first kicker off the board, but
Hmm.
I mean, they know a lot more about John Parker Romo and his abilities than I do. So I think getting Will Reichard, he was an absolute assassin. At Alabama, he kicked in some of the biggest moments in college football. So if you're going to draft a kicker, that's the type of player that I want on the roster competing for a job. So I. Who knows with the history of the kicking position in Minnesota? But it seems like they at least got it. They at least got one of the top kickers off the board. So I can't say anything negative about it.
Yeah, nor can I, because the Vikings are more than overdue to find their kicker that they found. And then that guy works out. And maybe if they would have had the patience with Daniel Carlson, I always caveat that because every single Vikings fan I know wanted that guy cut. And then we
Yeah.
always look back and we're like, can't believe that he left for the Raiders. It's like, really? You didn't want to ever see his face again after he missed the Packers kicks. So, yeah, hopefully this will be a different story where Reichard, I got to figure out how to pronounce his last name.
I think it's
Is just
Reichard.
Reichard? Okay.
I think so.
H is silent. Cool. All right. So the next time we talk, I
I actually
think
have a
we're,
quick question for
yeah.
you.
What is it?
Since we haven't talked about anything Vikings post draft yet.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about missing out on Drake May instead going after McCarthy? Do you think it was a good decision not to trade up, or do you still have it in the back of your mind a little bit? I kind of still like this guy a little bit better.
Oh, I certainly like what Drake May could have been in the Vikings offense better.
Yeah.
I am paranoid that he's going to get off to a lousy start in the Patriots. Paranoid for him, and then paranoid for me looking like a dipshit. Like, this guy wasn't good to begin. How
I
can I
won't hold
put it?
that against you.
No, if the price was only 3 first rounders, that is what I wanted them to pull the trigger on. It sounded like the Patriots really did want that stupid Godfather offer that far exceeded 3 firsts, and the Vikings were trying to do pick swaps in addition. So where I settled was the cutoff, and this was still thinking they'd have to trade 2 first rounders probably to get McCarthy, was if it's going to be more than 3 first rounders for May, then let's just do McCarthy, because I trust this system, this coach, and this depth chart to cultivate McCarthy. So I was sad that it wasn't May, because I just know, just like I felt about Stroud at this time last year, I could just see it with my own 2 eyes. This guy's going to be so good. Why doesn't everybody realize it? Certainly not let down by McCarthy, but one of my dirty little secrets about football is, in yesteryear, when the Vikings would be eliminated, which was, always,
Yeah.
I always latched on to Tom Brady and the Patriots. And this goes back because in like 2005, 2006, when I was a cocky 20-something, it drove me nuts that people would watch these football games and tell me that Peyton Manning was better than Tom Brady. Because every time you turned on the television in January, Peyton Manning would usually just plummeted. The one year he won a Super Bowl with the Colts, he played like shit. The defense was great. So I got into all these heated debates about Brady and Manning. And because of those, I started liking Brady. So I always had this satellite fandom for the Patriots when the Vikings were eliminated. And now that can just transfer over to Drake May and the Patriots. So that's how I kind of smiled once I realized, like, oh, he's going to the Patriots. Well, this won't be that hard for me to be invested in hoping that he's good. But what are we, 6 days removed? I am super excited about McCarthy. I'd love that they got the youngest quarterback. And I'm pretty sure that Drake May was their primary plan, but they, like me, almost had a cutoff that we just can't give anything more. So I'm very excited for McCarthy, and I'll end the show on this famous little speech that I've given. If you have Kevin O'Connell as a head coach, former quarterback, you have Josh McCown in the quarterback room as a quarterback coach, you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Christian Darrisaw, Aaron Jones, a progressive general manager who's willing to take risks. and the quarterback doesn't work out, there will be no other thing that the Vikings can do to get this thing right. And it's not that they've gone through doldrums at quarterback in the last 10 years. Kirk was pretty damn good, but finding their guy for the first time since Tarkenton or Tommy Kramer has been impossible. Culpepper was great for 5.5 years, and Bridgewater looked like he'd be pretty good. So we are so starved for that guy. If McCarthy can't turn into top 12, but basically for me, McCarthy has to be Dak Prescott or better for this to be successful. If he's just Kirk again, it's like, well, okay, we can hope for the best. I always have Prescott just this tiny little spot above Kirk. And so if McCarthy is a dud or is just mid, I don't know what else to do as a Vikings fan. Everything right now is tailor-made for anybody, and especially JJ McCarthy, the king of quarterback wins to succeed. So I'll be downtrodden if he's just some average guy. That's a very long answer. I'm super excited about McCarthy, but I'd be flat out lying if I was like, well, no, I never wanted Drake May to begin with. McCarthy's my guy. So what about you with Jaden Daniels? Is he going to click in Washington?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm worried about that landing spot. I'm not convinced that offensive line is going to be able to protect him all that much. And just with his tendency to take those massive hits, I'm very worried about an RG3 situation all over again, where he does absolutely everything to carry that team to the playoffs or at least close to it. And then all of a sudden an injury happens because the offensive line just isn't good enough. And he runs into one of those big nose tackles that the Vikings don't have and ends up missing a bunch of time down the stretch of his career. But I still think that Jaden Daniels is a really exciting prospect. If he ends up leading Washington to anything, I think that'll just be a success and just icing on the cake. But yeah, I'm worried about that landing spot for him. I still held out hope going into draft night that he would somehow end up with the Vikings between that JJ McCarthy smoke, Drake May smoke. Hey, maybe they just say, screw this. We're just going to take Drake May because we think he's the second best quarterback or something. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But like you said, the Vikings are tailor-made to have JJ McCarthy come into that building and be successful. So hopefully he's able to do it.
Also remember for the pro Jaden Daniels crowd is Washington was pretty busy in free agency. Like they didn't take an approach that suggested, well, we're not going to do anything. So no, they spent and they got some pretty decent players. So they are, with a new head coach, actually set up that if Jaden Daniels is this year's CJ Stroud or Justin Herbert, they can be pretty good. Their roster isn't like the Patriots where I'm like, oh God, this is what May has to start off with. I think the Patriots defense will be okay. But the offense, I can't believe that you're going to put like, that's the type of offense that you don't even know if Patrick Mahomes could make good. Like he probably could, but it is so many mid-tier everything that you're like,
KJ Osborne, wide receiver 1.
Like, that's what I mean.
I don't know. Yeah.
All right, man. One of the next major things coming up about 10 days from now is a schedule release. So we're getting pretty close to that. I'm not sure what will be in our orbit next week, but we'll talk to you next Wednesday about something Vikings related. All right, man?
Sounds great, dude. See you then.
All right.